Alright, so unfortunately the last one didn't end on the greatest note, and we're gonna kind of keep going with that theme today. Sorry. But we need to talk about it because it's important to learn how we got to where we are. So, World War II is over. Good news at least, right? The US military has spent a ton of money trying to learn about nuclear technology and nuclear weapons, so they're not gonna stop now. So what do? Well, we go out to the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Ideally, we stay way away from anybody. So if accidents happen, it's not that big of a deal. We're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, right? Well, we go out to the Marshall Islands, and the Marshall Islands are going to be important, and they were important in World War II, and that's kind of why we picked them. But we go out there to do some atomic testing. We have a couple of them, and in the videos, you can see that it's called Shot Able and Shot Baker. And they're two of the first tests that we do after World War II. And guess what? I didn't go super well, but it's not going to be the worst that we're going to see. So what happens is these go pretty much according to plan, mostly anyway. And they have these lab animals, lab animals on these ships because they want to test what's going to happen with radiation poisoning and what happens being in the direct line of firing of nuclear weapons, because we've now used them, so we might have them used on us. We're not really sure what's going to happen in the future. And they want to see, they being the US military, wants to see what happens if our Navy is hit by nuclear weapons. So they go and test it. One's dropped from the air, it's called an atmospheric test. One is detonated underneath the water. So we go through and we do all this. Now, everything is going to plan, the test goes to plan, but here's where it kind of goes off the rails a little bit. They go to recover the ships and they go to check out the animals and they go to recover the data after the test is over, and they realize that some of these ships have so much radiation and they are so contaminated that they actually can't even get to them, and they have to sink these ships into the ocean in order to keep contamination from spreading. Now, you might be thinking, well, doesn't that just put radiation in the water? Yeah, it does. It does exactly that. However, water actually, in the ocean specifically, is really good at spreading things out really quickly. Therefore, while it's not great that we're putting radiation into the water, it at least dissipates quickly, meaning that it gets rid of it, meaning it doesn't stay as harmful as long as you might think. So, silver linings, I guess? Anyway, because that went so well, we go and we make larger bombs. The next one's called Operation Castle, and the first one's going to be called Castle Bravo, and this is 1954, and it is a much larger weapon than anything that we have tested. This is now a hydrogen bomb. It's not going to work the same way as these old fission bombs. Doesn't go well. It doesn't go well. Turns out they got some of the math wrong, and when they did that, the fallout went way, way wider than they expected, and it ends up being kind of a mess because residents of nearby islands have now become exposed to this radiation and contamination and to this nuclear ash and nuclear fallout, which, it's as bad as it sounds. But anyway, the U.S. does what the U.S. does, and we kind of just get back on the horse and keep riding, so to say. But the sad part is that these people can't do that. And what do? Well, if you want to know what the U.S. does, we try to use this for good. So at the time, President Eisenhower, who was, a famous general in the military during World War II, says he's tired of seeing the U.S. be seen as a destructive force. He's tired of these weapons only being a negative thing. He's tired of the bad light, the bad publicity that the U.S. is getting for all these nuclear tests and all these errors that we're making as we test them. So what he wants is he wants to use these atoms for peace, that's what it's called. And he wants to make it into a positive thing. And he wants to try to turn this technology into something good. And we see that there is a whole new commission called the Atomic Energy Commission that is set out to see what we can do to make atomic energy, what we now know as nuclear energy. And they think that in the future, it's going to be so cheap that they can't even register how much to pay for electricity because it just costs so little, it's not even worth it. Yeah, I still have an electric bill, so unfortunately that didn't happen. But what does happen is we then reinvest a lot of money that we had previously spent on the military into civilian nuclear technology. And that gets us to nuclear reactors. And we're not going to get through all of it right now, but basically nuclear reactors happen in a very specific way under a lot of engineering, and they kind of have a bad rep, and people say they're a lot more scary and a lot more frightening than they are. And honestly, as you're going to see, if we do this correctly and engineers do their job correctly and people running the nuclear power plants do this correctly, there is zero concern for anything that happens at a nuclear power plant. Now, you hear the horror stories, yeah, but think about it like this. When a plane lands safely, is that news? No, we don't hear about the thousands and thousands of planes that land safely. What we hear about is the one or two that have accidents, and that becomes a news story. Now, that's not to downplay that those things are bad, and that's not to downplay that nuclear accidents are bad, but we have so few of them. Think about all the ones that aren't accidents because everything goes as planned. So how does a nuclear reactor work? Well, basically what we're going to do is we're going to take whatever the fuel is, typically it's uranium, and we're going to put it into a reaction, and we're going to create a fission reaction. And these fission reactions are going to happen in a nuclear plant that's controlled. The difference between a nuclear power plant and a nuclear bomb is that the reactions in a nuclear plant are controlled. The bomb is uncontrolled. So what happens? Well, this nuclear energy happens, and as we know, it gives off a lot of energy. Well, this energy is then used to heat up steam, and this steam goes to a turbine, and this turbine spins a generator, and a generator creates electricity. Sound familiar? It should. And it should say that it's the exact same as making coal, because other than burning coal and making steam that way, we're doing the exact same process, except now we're using nuclear energy instead of powdered coal to heat up a boiler. What we have in the power plant is these different things, and they're called fuel pellets. Now, fuel pellets are basically like caked uranium, and it's what we use to actually process the reaction. We also have fuel rods. Well, it's just all those little uranium pellets that are stacked on top of each other into a rod. We then also in the reactor have a control rod, and it's very important that these control rods are made out of neutron absorbing materials. Now, why is it important that it's made out of neutron absorbing materials? Well, what did we say just a little bit ago is what we shoot into the middle of a nucleus in order to create a chain reaction? Neutrons? Yeah, so if we want to slow down this reaction, we need something that can absorb these neutrons from hitting other nuclei. So if we want to speed up the reaction, if we want to make more energy, we take the control rods out a little bit. If we want to slow it down, we put the control rods back into the reaction a little bit. What we shouldn't do is take the control rods completely out. Chernobyl. What we have, though, in case we have an accident like Chernobyl or Fukushima or anything like that, all these reactors are in a containment building, and these are like meters thick of concrete buildings to protect the outside environment in case anything were to go down and any explosions were to happen and any kind of nuclear accidents or meltdowns were to occur. So basically all we're doing is we're taking the stuff that used to be in a bomb and then we're putting it in a building, except we're now controlling it and we're using it to heat up water, and that's how we turn lights on rather than burning coal. Complicated? Yeah, nuclear engineering is a complicated major, but if you're interested in it, the state has a good program for it. If you're still confused about this, ask me questions. If you're not confused about it, but you're still interested in it, ask me questions. Or just ask me other kinds of questions.